The night was quiet, the streets nearly empty, except for the soft hum of streetlights flickering above. James Carter, a decorated war veteran, was on his way home, his mind heavy with memories of the battlefield. He had served his country with honor, but tonight he was about to face a battle he never expected, one on his own soil. As James walked toward his car, he heard the sudden screech of tires behind him. A police cruiser pulled up fast, and before he could react, an officer stepped out, Officer Daniels. His eyes burned with hostility as he took slow, deliberate steps toward James. "Hey, you look suspicious. What are you doing out here?" Daniels' voice dripped with arrogance. James, calm and collected, simply responded, "I'm heading home, officer. Is there a problem?" But that answer wasn't good enough. Daniels wasn't looking for an explanation. He was looking for control. He shoved James backward, his hand resting on his holster as if daring him to resist. "You people never know when to stay in line," the officer muttered under his breath. But what Daniels didn't know was that James wasn't just any man. He had spent years in the military, trained to stay composed under pressure. And when the situation took a violent turn, tables flipped in the most unexpected way, leaving Officer Daniels in a desperate position he never saw coming. What happens next will leave you speechless. Stay tuned. James took a deep breath, his muscles tensing, but he kept his hands at his sides. He knew how these situations could go, and he wasn't about to give this officer any excuse. His heartbeat was steady, trained for moments like this. But no matter how much training he had, it never prepared him for the feeling of being treated like a criminal for simply existing. Officer Daniels smirked, his grip tightening on his belt. "You're awfully calm for someone about to be arrested," he sneered. "Must mean you're up to something." His voice was laced with the kind of arrogance that came from years of unchecked power. James didn't flinch. "I served this country. I know my rights," he said, his voice steady. Daniels laughed coldly. "That's supposed to mean something to me," he scoffed. "Out here, your past doesn't matter. Only thing that matters is who's in control. And right now, that's me." The street was empty, no witnesses, no one to step in. Daniels took a step closer, his posture shifting. James could feel a shift in energy, a storm building. Then, without warning, Daniels lashed out, his boot connecting with James's leg, forcing him off balance. James stumbled but didn't fall. He clenched his jaw, every instinct screaming at him to react, but he held back. Because what Daniels didn't know, what he never even considered, was that James wasn't just a veteran. He was something more. And soon Daniels was going to find out exactly what that meant. James straightened himself, locking eyes with Officer Daniels, his expression unreadable. He had faced worse threats in war zones, but something about this moment, being treated like nothing in the country he fought for, hit differently. He knew he had to be careful. One wrong move, and this could turn into something far worse. Daniels, on the other hand, was itching for a reaction. His fingers hovered near his holster, his breath quickening with a mix of anticipation and misplaced confidence. "What's wrong, tough guy? Got nothing to say now?" he taunted. The street was still empty, silent except for the distant sound of a passing car. James could feel the weight of the moment pressing down. He wasn't just standing up for himself, he was standing up for every man who had been in his shoes, for every veteran who returned home only to find a different kind of battlefield waiting for them. But he also knew there was another way to win this fight, one that didn't involve playing into Daniels' hands. Then something shifted. A voice crackled through Daniels' radio. "Unit 47, we've got an alert on your badge. Return to the station immediately." Daniels froze. His cocky smirk wavered for the first time. James noticed the slight twitch in his eye, the hesitation in his stance. Something wasn't right. James had seen fear before, and now, for the first time, Daniels looked afraid. And that's when James knew this officer had secrets of his own. Daniels' whole demeanor changed. The radio call had rattled him, his once confident stance now stiff with unease. James watched closely, sensing the shift. The man who had been so sure of himself minutes ago now looked like someone who had just been caught in a storm he wasn't prepared for. "That's got to be a mistake," Daniels muttered under his breath, his fingers twitching near his radio. He hesitated before responding, his voice tense. "Dispatch, repeat that. Return to the station. Now," the voice on the other end said, firmer this time. James didn't move, but he could feel the power dynamic shifting. Something was wrong. Daniels wasn't the one in control anymore. His confidence had cracked, and James could see the frustration in his face as he weighed his options. Daniels turned back to James, his jaw clenched. "You stay right here," he ordered, pointing a finger at him as if that alone would keep him frozen in place. Then, with one last glare, he stepped away, heading toward his cruiser. But James had spent enough time in the military to know when someone was about to make a desperate move. Daniels wasn't running back to the station. He was stalling, scrambling for a way out of whatever trouble he was in. James took a slow step forward. "Looks like you're the one with something to hide," he said, his voice calm but firm. Daniels whipped around, eyes flashing. For the first time tonight, James wasn't the one being hunted. Daniels was. Daniels' eyes darted around as if calculating his next move. His fingers hovered near his radio, but he hesitated. James could see it now. This wasn't just an officer abusing his power. There was something bigger at play, something Daniels was trying to hide. And whatever was waiting for him back at the station, it was worse than anything happening on this empty street. Then, just as Daniels took another step toward his cruiser, the radio crackled again. This time, the voice was different. Urgent. "All units, Officer Daniels is to be taken into custody immediately. Do not let him leave the scene." Daniels froze, his face drained of color. His breathing quickened. For the first time all night, he wasn't in control of anything. James didn't move, just watched as the weight of those words sank in. The same officer who had tried to intimidate him, belittle him, was now the one being hunted. The irony wasn't lost on him. Daniels' hand shot to his waist, but not for his gun. He was reaching for his keys. He was going to run. James stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "That wouldn't be a good idea." Daniels' head snapped up. Their eyes met, and in that moment, James saw something he didn't expect, pure panic. Not just fear of getting arrested, but fear of what would happen if he did. Something was coming for Daniels, and whatever it was, he was more afraid of it than anything else. Daniels' hand trembled over his keys, his mind racing for an escape, but it was too late. The distant sound of sirens grew louder, flashing red and blue lights bouncing off the buildings. Backup had arrived, but not for him. James stood firm, watching as 2 squad cars skidded to a stop, doors flying open. Officers stepped out, weapons drawn, but their focus wasn't on James. It was on Daniels. "Hands where we can see them," one of them barked. Daniels hesitated, his eyes darting between James and the officers. He knew there was no way out, but his pride wouldn't let him go down without a fight. "You don't understand," he blurted, his voice desperate. "I was just doing my job." One of the officers moved closer. "Your job," he scoffed. "You've been under investigation for months, Daniels. Corruption, illegal arrests, planting evidence. You really thought you'd get away with it." James felt a weight lift. So this wasn't just about tonight. Daniels had been abusing his power for a long time, but now his past had finally caught up with him. Daniels let out a shaky breath, his confidence completely shattered. He slowly raised his hands, surrendering. But just as the officers moved in to cuff him, he turned to James, his voice low, almost pleading. "You don't know what's really going on," he whispered. "This goes way deeper than me." James narrowed his eyes. A chill ran down his spine. The battle was over, but the real war, it had just begun. James stood still, watching as the officers cuffed Daniels and led him toward the squad car. The man who had once held so much power, who thought he was untouchable, now looked small, defeated. But it was his last words that stuck with James. "This goes way deeper than me, "." For a moment, James considered asking what he meant, but he knew it wouldn't matter now. Daniels had made his choices, and now he had to answer for them. Whatever corruption he was a part of, it would come to light, and James had played his part in making sure justice was served. One of the officers turned to James. "Sorry you had to go through that, sir," he said, his tone sincere. "We've been trying to take him down for a while. He finally slipped up." James nodded but said nothing. He wasn't looking for an apology, he just wanted to go home. He had already fought his battles overseas. He never expected to fight one here, on his own streets. As the police cars pulled away, James exhaled, feeling the weight of the night slowly fade. He looked up at the sky, the stars still shining above, indifferent to what had just happened. He had survived another fight, and though he didn't know what Daniel's final words truly meant, he did know one thing. No matter how deep corruption ran, the truth always found a way to the surface. And that was a battle worth fighting.